Okay, next we're in conversation with John Steenhuisen, who is the leader of the Democratic Alliance. And this, as the Democratic Alliance says that it wants the report which the State Security Minister, Ayanda Dlodlo, claimed she handed over to the SEPs prior to the recent unrest, but which the Police Minister, Bheki Cele, says that he has never received. John, good afternoon and welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, Aldrin. Great to be with you and great to be with the listeners today.
Thank you so much for making time for us as well. So have the papers been filed as yet?
Yes, the papers have been lodged. They were lodged this morning, and we hope to hear back soon from government. We obviously expect that they will turn down the request in the first instance, obviously because of the implications thereof. But we believe it is important information that the media, opposition, and citizens in the country are entitled to.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So from the appearance of the Minister of Defence, is there anything that the Democratic Alliance believes is a red flag? This is now her appearance before Parliament.
No, I don't think it's a red flag there. I think the big dispute that exists is between the Minister of State Security and the Minister of the SAP of Police. I think that in many instances, Minister Mapisa Nkula ensured that the military was deployed eventually in the bigger numbers. She's obviously got her own issues, whether it was a coup or not, and with the president's characterization thereof. But I think the big dispute lies about who knew about what was going to happen, when did they know about it, and what they did about it.
Mm-hmm.
And the hot potato that's been passed for the last fortnight between Minister Dlodlo and Minister Cele, I think, is only going to be settled when we have sight of what reports were released and who they were given to and what those respective ministries did with it.
Mm-hmm. Isn't the parliamentary process also a better way to get to that?
Well, it could drag on for as long as we know. There's been no terms of reference. There's been no establishment of a committee. We've been hearing talk that there's going to be a parliamentary inquiry. We've had no creation of that committee as yet. And I think that it is important as soon as possible for the interests of democratic accountability that we get to the bottom of this. I think precisely because there have got to be consequences for those ministers who may or may not have failed the country to be held accountable. And I think the sooner that happens, the better. Yep. I think a lot of people are very frustrated and angry over the events of the last fortnight. And billions of rands have been lost and people's lives have been affected. And I think people want to know and want to see accountability.
Yeah, I think one of the other reasons that I asked about the issue around Parliament is that, let's say, for instance, that the president decides to reshuffle his cabinet. And he removes the three ministers, including the Minister of Intelligence. What process would then be undertaken to ensure that there is still accountability, even if the said ministers are removed from those positions?
Well, I think that there's a greater fundamental issue here that transcends this particular crisis. Mm-hmm. And that is the model that we have of oversight and accountability of the security services in South Africa, and particularly the intelligence services. I think we have one of the most cloak and dagger and draconian systems of oversight in the world. Even an organization like the Central Intelligence Agency in the United States has far more open congressional oversight of its activities than the South African State Security Agency does. And I think these weaknesses were identified already 2 years ago in the Mufamadi report. And Minister Dlodlo and the President and others have sat on the findings of that report for far too long, that we need to fundamentally reform the way in which intelligence is, A, gathered in South Africa, and secondly, the oversight of those intelligence services. The experiences of the current Inspector General of Intelligence, where he was essentially shut out when he started to inquire about some of the instances that we've read about and the President's keepers involving Mr. Fraser and others, is a very good example of why we need to fundamentally change that. So we can shuffle the ministers, and I think that there does need to be democratic accountability, but I think the entire model of oversight of the intelligence services is well overdue for reform, and I think Parliament's got a central role to play in that.
Mm-hmm. And how do you do that, considering the sensitive information that the intelligence deal with?
Well, look, you've got to separate the stuff that's really going to affect and needs to be kept quiet, and because it can affect the operational integrity of what the intelligence services are doing, and then accountability. It is, for instance, unforgivable that there's no Auditor General reporting by the State Security Agency. They spend billions of rands every year with no Auditor General report. They have no budget vote debates in Parliament. You're not allowed to go into detail on it. So I think that the model used in most democracies is that committee and congressional hearings are held in public unless there's something sensitive, and then they go into committee. In South Africa, the opposite is the case. Everything is held in secret in the JSCI model, and nothing is ever discussed in the open. And I think that's created the environment where we have a state security apparatus in South Africa now that services not the national interest, but the party interest, and is more involved in protecting individuals within the ANC than citizens of the Republic. And I think that the events of the last fortnight show the folly of that and how devastating it can actually be to a country when that happens.
Speaking about the issues around consequence management, there is the Minister of Health who is still on special leave. And of course, the SIU report has been handed over to the President.
Yes, of course. And I think this should be a concern for all South Africans. What we want is accountability. I think South Africans deserve to know whether during the midst of the most serious health crisis, as the President set it out in his speech on Sunday, that South Africa has faced in post-democratic history, whether we had a health minister whose mind was not on how to save lives and livelihoods, but on how to enrich friends and family. And I think that it's doing both Minister Mkhize and the presidency and the country a huge disservice to have an acting health minister and to have these allegations hanging out over his head. The report has started to leak, and it's made its way into various media over the course of the last week. And I think that attrition is going to continue, and I think it's very, very damaging that we don't have the accountability and we don't have the decisive leadership from the president in saying, well, look, this is the findings of the report. I'm clearing the man, or I'm asking him to leave. But we're left in limbo. We've got an acting health minister in the midst of the pandemic, and I don't think this is a good place for us to be as a country.
We also have an acting spokesperson in the presidency. Today marks a year since Khusela Diko took leave of absence. And yeah.
Well, I mean, it's like Hollywood. Everyone's acting. You've got an acting health minister in a pandemic. You've got an acting spokesperson in the presidency. You've got acting people all over government. And I think that what the president needs to do is to take the advice of Winston Churchill when he said, don't waste a good crisis. He's got a crisis now. I think he's got a chance to strike decisively and to stamp his authority on his government and his cabinet. We've also got a deputy president who's absent. This is a man who was put in charge of the COVID-19 response, a man put in charge of the Eskom response, both of which are literally falling to pieces before our eyes. And he's nowhere to be seen. We're told he's in Russia. We've no idea why he's there. There's just too many loose ends in this government and too little accountability. Yeah. I think the president's got to gather these threads together and tie them together tightly, or he's going to end up with a situation that's going to run away from him very, very quickly.
Does the Democratic Alliance still have confidence in the president of the country?
I think that it's a quintessential question in politics. So compared to what? Compared to a deputy president who's absent and ostensibly in Russia seeking treatment from their services while consigning the majority of South Africans to the public healthcare system in South Africa. I think it's compared to what? So I would be reluctant to move a motion of no confidence in this president without the knowledge about who we're going to get in his place, because you could end up with something far worse and could end up playing directly into the hands of the radical economic transformation faction. So I would prefer to see us working together to do the things that are right by the country. And you don't have to be an ANC member or a DA member to understand what we need to be doing. I think now is the time for cool heads around a table working together to be able to get South Africa out of this terrible crisis that we find ourselves in. It's a hydra of a crisis. We've got an economic crisis. We've got a socio-economic crisis. We've got an unrest crisis. We've got a health pandemic on our hands. This is a time now, I think, for the best heads to be around the table, working together to find the solutions that we need to move the country forward.
Sure, but does that mean that the Democratic Alliance has confidence in the president of the country?
Well, I wouldn't say we've got confidence in the president. I mean, you'd be hard to press to find an opposition around the world that had a confidence in the president. But I certainly have a lot more confidence in him than I do in Ace Magashule, Mr. Jacob Zuma, Mr. Julius Malema, or Mr. David Mabuza. And I think that, as I said, is the quintessential question: compared to what? And so I would rather work together to try and find a solution to getting the country moving forward than handing the country over to the very faction that want to bring it to its knees and who are largely behind the events that we've seen over the last fortnight.
Thank you so much for your time, John Steenhuisen, leader of the Democratic Alliance. It's time for the news headlines with Mundupi Makhalimela. Good afternoon.